Welcome to Truth Unraveled, where hidden stories come to light. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next untold truth. Clara Jenkins had always been the kind of woman people overlooked. She wasn't flashy, didn't demand attention, and never had the luxury of chasing big dreams. For almost 30 years, she had worked as a maid in the sprawling Whitmore mansion, a place that looked more like a palace than a home. She knew every creak of the wooden floors, every smudge on the crystal chandeliers, and every hidden corner of the massive estate. While the Whitmore family lived in grandeur, Clara moved quietly in the background, dusting, polishing, scrubbing, and mending without complaint. To the outside world, the mansion stood as a symbol of wealth and power, owned by one of the wealthiest families in the city. Inside, it was Clara who kept the heart of it beating. Yet, most days, no one seemed to notice. Every morning, Clara would arrive before the sun came up, her modest sedan pulling into the back entrance of the estate. She wore the same neatly pressed uniform she had worn for decades, a simple navy dress and apron, always spotless, always professional. She had long since given up wearing perfume. In her line of work, the scent of bleach and lemon polish lingered no matter what. Her small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town was nothing like the mansion she cleaned. The carpets were worn, the wallpaper peeling, but it was home. It was all she could afford after years of raising 2 children on her own. Her son had moved out of state, chasing work wherever he could find it, and her daughter lived nearby, busy with her own family. Clara rarely spoke of her struggles, but anyone who paid attention could see the toll of hard work etched into her hands and the lines on her face. Still, Clara was dependable. In a world where even family members could not always be trusted, Mr. Whitmore, the patriarch of the household, knew he could always count on her. He had often said, "Clara, you take better care of this house than anyone in it." But his words were usually drowned out by the laughter of his children and their spouses. To them, Clara was invisible, just the help. They would hand her coats without looking her in the eye, leave messes for her to clean without a second thought, and whisper condescending remarks when they thought she couldn't hear. It wasn't that Clara was weak. On the contrary, she had built her life on resilience. Widowed in her 30s, she had taken on every extra job she could find to keep food on the table for her children. Nights scrubbing office buildings, weekends ironing laundry for strangers, and endless mornings spent inside the Whitmore estate. It all blurred together into a lifetime of sacrifice. But despite everything, Clara had dignity. She never let the Whitmores see her pride crack, even when they treated her like a piece of furniture. She understood something they didn't. Wealth wasn't a T, measured in dollars or possessions. It was measured in character. Over the years, she had witnessed countless family dinners in the grand dining room, crystal glasses raised in toasts, chandeliers glittering overhead. She remembered holidays filled with expensive gifts piled under massive Christmas trees, vacations to exotic places, and parties that overflowed with champagne. Yet she also saw the shadows behind the luxury, the whispered arguments, the bitterness between siblings, the way greed quietly ate away at the family. To Clara, the mansion was a contradiction, a house full of everything money could buy, and yet empty of gratitude. Still, she endured. She smiled politely when they ignored her. She carried trays of hors d'oeuvres through their parties as if she were invisible. And when they mocked her in subtle ways, "Clara, don't you ever get tired of scrubbing floors?" She simply answered, "Work keeps me strong." At night, when she drove home to her modest apartment, Clara sometimes wondered what her life might have been if she had chosen differently. If she had gone to college, if her husband had lived, if she had dared to dream bigger. But those thoughts never lingered long. She had learned long ago that wondering about what if only made the present harder. The truth was, she never envied the Whitmores. Their lives looked glamorous on the outside, but she saw the cracks beneath the surface. She saw the way they fought over money, the way they treated their staff, the way they seemed more obsessed with appearances than with kindness. No, Clara didn't want their lives. She just wanted stability, respect, and maybe, someday, the chance to rest. There was only one member of the Whitmore family who truly saw her, Mr. Whitmore himself. Though he was stern and private, he had always treated Clara with a certain respect that his children lacked. He would sometimes sit in the study while she dusted, asking her about her children, listening without judgment. He never spoke down to her, never dismissed her presence. To him, she was more than the maid. She was someone who had stood by his side, keeping his home together for 3 decades. Clara never expected anything in return for her loyalty. She wasn't waiting for a reward or recognition. Her reward was knowing she had survived every hardship life had thrown at her. She had raised 2 children on her own, built a reputation as reliable and honest, and carried herself with quiet pride. But fate has a strange way of turning the overlooked into the unforgettable. What Clara didn't know, what no one in the Whitmore family suspected, was that the man of the house had been watching closely all along. He had seen her sacrifices, her dignity, and her unwavering loyalty. And though his children thought themselves entitled to his wealth, Mr. Whitmore had quietly written a very different ending. For now, though, Clara remained in the shadows, polishing silver that would never be hers, dusting portraits of a family that never acknowledged her, and tucking away her own dreams as if they were too fragile to see the light. She didn't yet realize that soon, everything would change. On weekends, Clara often worked behind the scenes while the family filled the halls with their booming voices and unrestrained laughter. The Whitmore children, Edward, the eldest son, Caroline, the only daughter, and Andrew, the youngest, had inherited not only their father's fortune, but also his commanding presence. Yet, unlike Mr. Whitmore, they lacked humility. From the moment they walked into the house, Clara could feel the shift in energy. It was as though they carried the weight of entitlement on their shoulders, expecting the world, and everyone in it, to bend to their desires. Edward, in particular, was the most difficult. At 45, he carried himself like a king waiting for his crown. He strutted through the halls with an expensive glass of scotch in hand, barking orders at staff as if they were his personal servants. He rarely acknowledged Clara, except to criticize. "Clara," he once snapped when she brought fresh linens to his guest room, "you really must do a better job with the ironing. Wrinkles are completely unacceptable. Do I need to remind you that this is the Whitmore estate, not some second-rate motel?" Clara bowed her head politely. "Yes, Mr. Edward. I'll take care of it immediately." Inside, her dignity burned, but she swallowed the sting. Years of practice had taught her to remain calm, even when the Whitmore children treated her like nothing more than furniture. Caroline was no kinder. She had a sharp tongue and a sharper sense of superiority. A socialite in her late 30s, she lived for charity galas and photo ops, constantly posting glamorous pictures online of herself, giving back. Yet at home, she had no kindness for the people who worked for her family. "Clara," she scoffed one evening while adjusting her diamond bracelet, "could you not walk so loudly in the halls? It ruins the ambiance when I'm entertaining guests. Honestly, sometimes I don't know why Father insists on keeping old staff around. We could easily hire younger, more polished help." Her words cut like glass, but Clara forced a gentle smile. "Of course, Miss Caroline. I'll be more mindful." And then there was Andrew, the youngest, reckless, and perpetually in debt. Unlike his siblings, he wasn't cruel in words, but his arrogance came in the form of careless disregard. He would throw wild parties in the mansion, leaving behind broken glass, stained carpets, and mountains of trash for Clara to clean. He rarely apologized, often shrugging and saying, "That's what staff is for." Every insult, every careless demand, every moment of disrespect, they all piled up in Clara's memory. She didn't lash out or complain. Instead, she let their arrogance roll over her like waves against a stone. But each wave left its mark, slowly shaping her quiet resolve. The arrogance of the Whitmore children wasn't reserved just for Clara. They treated nearly everyone with disdain. Business partners were stepping stones. Neighbors were competition. Even among themselves, they fought like wolves over scraps of power. Edward was obsessed with taking over the family business, convinced he was the rightful heir. Caroline, meanwhile, lobbied for influence, insisting she had the public image to lead the Whitmore empire into the future. And Andrew, though he had little to contribute, demanded his share of money, often pressuring his siblings for loans. To them, their father's wealth was not a legacy to honor, but a prize to fight over. Clara often overheard their heated arguments while dusting the hallways. "Father owes it to me. Edward growled during one family dinner. "I've been preparing for this role my entire life," Caroline shot back. "Please, Edward, you're nothing but a bully with a title. I'm the only one with the charisma to keep our family name respected." Andrew, slumped in his chair, smirked. "Both of you sound ridiculous. Father has enough money to go around. Just give me my cut and you can tear each other apart." Their bickering echoed through the halls, bouncing off marble floors and gilded walls. Clara would retreat quietly, pretending she hadn't heard. But inside, she couldn't help but feel a deep sadness. How could a family with so much be so empty inside? She thought of her own children, how she had sacrificed every ounce of energy to give them lives of stability and love. She thought of the quiet meals in her modest kitchen, filled with laughter even when food was scarce. She thought of nights when she had gone to bed hungry so her children could eat, never once regretting the choice. And here were the Whitmores, drowning in riches yet starving for kindness. Despite their arrogance, there was one thing none of them could see: Mr. Whitmore's silence. The patriarch watched his children fight with a heavy heart, his stern face revealing little. But Clara noticed. She always noticed. When Edward barked about his entitlement, Mr. Whitmore's jaw tightened. When Caroline flaunted her supposed brilliance, his eyes grew cold. When Andrew begged for money, he would sigh, shaking his head with quiet disappointment. It was in those moments that Clara realized the truth. While the Whitmore children believed they were securing their future, they were blind to the reality that their father's trust in them was already crumbling. And Clara, the invisible worker they dismissed, had become the only constant presence he could rely on. Late one evening, as Clara polished the silver in the dining room, Mr. Whitmore entered quietly. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching her work. Finally, he spoke. "Clara," he said softly, "you've seen my children. You know what they're like." Clara hesitated, unsure how to respond. "They're your family, sir," she replied carefully. He nodded slowly. "Family isn't always what it should be." There was a weight in his voice, a kind of sorrow that made Clara pause. She wanted to ask more, but she didn't. It wasn't her place. Instead, she continued polishing the silver, pretending not to notice the storm that lingered in his eyes. The Whitmore children remained blind, consumed by their arrogance. But Clara knew something was shifting. And soon, when the will was finally read, their entitlement would be shattered like glass, leaving only the quiet dignity of the woman they had ignored. The air inside the Whitmore mansion felt heavier than usual. It was a late autumn morning, the kind where the leaves clung stubbornly to the trees before surrendering to the wind. But inside, no one noticed the weather. The family had gathered in the grand parlor to hear the reading of Mr. Whitmore's will. The room was a shrine to wealth, polished mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across the Persian rug, portraits of long-dead Whitmores staring down with cold, painted eyes. Clara stood in the corner, invisible as always. She hadn't been asked to join the family, of course. Her role was to serve coffee, hand out tissues if anyone cried, and disappear into the background. Yet Mr. Whitmore's lawyer, Mr. Gregory Hale, had insisted she remain in the room. "Mr. Whitmore made it clear," Hale said firmly when Edward objected. "Everyone he named in the will must be present." Edward scoffed, swirling his scotch glass even though it was only 10 in the morning. "Father must have been losing his mind in those final days. There's no reason for the maid to be here." Caroline smirked cruelly. "Maybe he left her his cufflinks. Sentimental old fool." Andrew snickered from his seat, tapping on his phone, barely paying attention. Clara lowered her gaze, clutching the silver tray in her hands. Their words cut, but she held her composure. Years of endurance had taught her to stand tall in silence. Mr. Hale, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and a presence as sharp as his tailored suit, unfolded the will with deliberate care. His voice carried the weight of authority as he began to read. "I, Richard Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The heirs straightened in their seats, anticipation burning in their eyes. Edward leaned back, already smug, as though the outcome were a foregone conclusion. Caroline tilted her chin, rehearsing the triumphant press release she would no doubt draft. Andrew scrolled through his phone, too jaded to pretend he cared, but secretly desperate for the inheritance that would keep his lifestyle afloat. Clara listened quietly, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She had expected nothing. After all, what could a man like Mr. Whitmore possibly leave to a woman like her? The first few lines were predictable. Hale listed Mr. Whitmore's accounts, assets, and properties. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. To my son, Edward Whitmore, I leave. Hale paused, his voice cool. Nothing. The glass slipped from Edward's hand, shattering against the marble floor. What? His voice thundered, echoing through the parlor. That's impossible. Read it again. Hale's eyes didn't flinch. Mr. Whitmore was clear. He stated that Edward had shown himself unworthy of stewardship, and he wished not to burden him with responsibility he could not bear. Edward's face turned crimson, his fists clenching on the armrests. Caroline leaned forward eagerly. And to me? She asked, almost giddy. Hale continued, To my daughter, Caroline Whitmore, I leave nothing. The color drained from Caroline's face. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she stammered, This must be a mistake. I was his pride and joy. I represented our family. I carried our name. Mr. Whitmore wrote that while you sought recognition, you lacked sincerity, Hale read firmly. He entrusted his fortune to someone who understood humility and loyalty. Caroline's diamond bracelet jingled as she slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous! I demand to see the original document! Hale ignored her protests and pressed on. To my youngest son, Andrew Whitmore. Andrew straightened, a sly grin tugging at his lips. Finally, he muttered. I leave nothing. Andrew's phone clattered to the floor. What? He shouted. The old man knew I needed this. He knew This isn't fair. He can't do this to me. Hale folded the paper slightly, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on Clara. And now, the remainder of Mr. Whitmore's estate, to Clara Evans, my housekeeper and confidant of 30 years. The room fell silent. The heirs froze, their expressions painted with disbelief. I leave the Whitmore mansion, all financial assets, and controlling shares of Whitmore Enterprises. The words hung in the air like thunder. Clara's breath caught in her throat. I don't understand, she whispered. Edward surged to his feet, his voice a roar. This is insane. She's the help. She doesn't deserve a penny, let alone the estate. Caroline's laughter was brittle, desperate. Father must have been manipulated. There's no other explanation. Clara, she's a servant, not family. Andrew buried his face in his hands, groaning. This can't be happening. It can't. Hale remained composed. Mr. Whitmore was of sound mind. This will was signed, witnessed, and notarized. His decision is final. The Whitmore heirs erupted in chaos, accusations, insults, and disbelief flooding the room. But Clara heard nothing beyond the pounding of her own heart. She saw Mr. Whitmore's face in her memory, the quiet nods, the subtle kindness, the moments when his eyes softened as she served him tea. She thought of his words late at night when the house was quiet, how he lamented that his children had lost their way. And now it made sense. He had seen her, truly seen her, all along. Miss Evans, Mr. Hale said, breaking through her thoughts. Do you accept the inheritance as outlined? Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She could feel the heir's eyes burning into her, filled with fury, disbelief, and venom. At last, she managed a trembling whisper. I do. The storm that erupted from the Whitmore children could have toppled walls. Edward vowed to contest the will. Caroline shrieked about betrayal. Andrew begged for reconsideration, but Clara stood quietly, her hands still clutching the silver tray. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. The overlooked maid had become the center of it all. The room still trembled with the aftershock of the will's reading. Edward, Caroline, and Andrew shouted over one another, their outrage colliding like thunderclaps in the parlor. The glittering chandeliers above swayed slightly from the force of their rage. Clara stood rooted to the spot, clutching the tray against her chest as if it might shield her from the storm. She hadn't asked for this. Not the mansion, not the wealth, not the scorn now slicing toward her like knives. Edward's voice rose above the din, sharp as a whip. This is a con. She tricked father in his last days, preyed on his weakness. She's a parasite, nothing more. Caroline's eyes glittered with venom. A gold digger in a maid's uniform. Admit it, Clara. You manipulated him. You played the loyal servant, waiting for your chance to steal everything. Andrew, pacing wildly, jabbed a finger at her. You think you can walk into our house, our legacy, and take it from us? You'll regret this. We'll drag you through every court in the state. Clara swallowed hard. Her instinct was to retreat, to vanish into the background as she always had. But something in her heart resisted. Mr. Whitmore's words, etched in the letter Hale had handed her, echoed in her mind. You are the true steward of what I built. You understand loyalty in a way my children never did. She raised her eyes, steadying her breath. I didn't trick him. I served him faithfully for 3 decades. He made his decision. Not me. Her calmness only fueled their fury. Edward slammed his fist against the oak table. Lies. We'll prove it in court. Father was not in his right mind. Everyone knows he was confused near the end. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses, his voice slicing through the chaos. Mr. Whitmore's mental competency was confirmed by multiple doctors. This will is ironclad. Any attempt to contest it will be unwise. Caroline's laugh was cold, brittle. Unwise? Do you know who we are? We are the Whitmores. This woman is nothing. She won't last a day against us. Clara's hands trembled, but she met Caroline's glare. I lasted 30 years under your roof, she said softly. I think I'll manage. The silence that followed was electric. For once, Clara wasn't invisible. For once, her words carried weight. But the backlash didn't end in that room. Whispers. Beyond the mansion. By evening, the news had begun to spread. The Whitmore family's circle of friends, the country club elites, the business associates. Word traveled fast. The heirs were livid, leaking their side of the story to anyone who would listen. She manipulated father, Edward declared to a local reporter. She took advantage of an old man's fragile state. This will is an insult to our family's legacy. Caroline staged her outrage with performative grace. Clara was like a shadow, always hovering. We thought she was harmless. Now we see the truth. She was plotting all along. Andrew, less polished, ranted in a late-night interview. It's theft, plain and simple. She robbed us. My father was duped. But Clara, despite the media storm, remained silent. She didn't chase cameras, didn't defend herself in tabloids. She continued to live in her modest apartment, showing up at the mansion each day, quietly cleaning as if nothing had changed. This silence unnerved the Whitmore heirs even more. She's playing the martyr, Caroline hissed to Edward, letting the world paint her as some saint. We can't let that narrative stick. A visit from Caroline. One evening, Clara finished polishing the silver when the front door burst open. Caroline swept in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. You think this is over? She spat, her perfume cloying in the air. You may have a piece of paper saying the mansion is yours, but you don't belong here. This house is ours, our name, our blood, our history. Clara set the silver down carefully. It was your father's choice. Caroline's lips curled. Father was senile, and if you think the courts will side with a maid over us, you're delusional. She leaned closer, her voice dripping venom. Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts, Clara, because when we're done, you'll have nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even your dignity. For a moment, Clara felt the old fear returning, the same fear she'd carried for years under their cruel stares. But then she remembered Mr. Whitmore's letter. She straightened, her voice steady. I never asked for any of this, but I won't be bullied into giving it up. If you think I'm going to back down, you don't know me at all. Caroline's eyes narrowed, a flash of uncertainty breaking through her arrogance. She turned sharply and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The storm ahead. Within days, the heirs filed a lawsuit contesting the will. The headlines blared across newspapers and television screens. Maid inherits mansion. Whitmore children cry foul. Family fortune at stake. Will battle looms. The story polarized the community. Some whispered that Clara must have schemed. Others admired the loyalty Mr. Whitmore had recognized. Clara found herself caught in the eye of a storm she never wanted. Lawyers called. Reporters camped outside her building. Neighbors whispered when she passed. Yet, amidst the chaos, Clara discovered something unexpected. Strength. For years, she had lived unseen, her voice drowned out by the wealthy voices around her. Now, for the first time, people were listening. And though the accusations stung, though the weight of their hatred pressed against her, she resolved to stand her ground. Because deep down, she knew the truth. And the truth Mr. Whitmore had promised her would always outlast lies. The day of the first hearing arrived with an icy gray sky hanging over the city. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their microphones thrust forward like spears, their cameras clicking endlessly. Clara, dressed in her plainest navy dress and an old wool coat, walked steadily toward the entrance. She clutched her worn leather bag close to her chest, inside of which rested the most precious piece of paper she had ever held, Mr. Whitmore's final letter to her. Behind her, Edward, Caroline, and Andrew emerged from a black town car, flanked by expensive attorneys in sharp suits. They looked like royalty, their anger sharpened into polished performance for the cameras. "This is about justice," Edward declared to the flashing lights. "Our father was manipulated. We are here to protect his true legacy." Caroline dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "We loved our father. We won't let a servant tarnish his memory." Andrew sneered, pointing toward Clara. "That woman stole from us, but we'll take back what's ours." The reporters swiveled toward Clara, shoving microphones near her face. "Clara, do you have a response? Did you manipulate Mr. Whitmore? Are you prepared to lose everything?" She hesitated only a moment before answering softly. "I served Mr. Whitmore faithfully for 30 years. His decision was his own. I have nothing else to add." Her quiet dignity stood in sharp contrast to the Whitmore's spectacle. The crowd murmured. Some journalists raised their brows, and so the battle began. Inside the courtroom. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. Judge Henderson, a stern man with silver hair and piercing eyes, presided from the bench. The Whitmore heirs sat at one table, their attorneys surrounded by thick binders of evidence. Clara sat at the other, beside Mr. Hale, her attorney, who carried only a slim folder. Edward's lawyer was the first to speak. "Your Honor, the late Mr. Whitmore was clearly under undue influence. This maid, this servant, took advantage of a grieving, weakened man to secure his fortune. The will does not reflect his true intentions." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clara lowered her eyes, feeling the sting of the words. Then Mr. Hale rose. Calm, measured, his voice carried weight. "Your Honor, the late Mr. Whitmore's mental capacity was confirmed by 2 physicians mere weeks before this will was signed. Furthermore, the letter he left for my client demonstrates not coercion, but clarity of thought, trust, and gratitude." The judge leaned forward. "A letter, you say?" "Yes, Your Honor," Hale replied. "My client will read it aloud." The letter. Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded the envelope, the paper yellowed with time, the handwriting unmistakably Mr. Whitmore's. Her voice quavered at first, but grew steadier as she read. "To Clara, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. For decades, you stood by me when no one else did. My children were often absent, chasing their own ambitions, while you tended not only to my house but to my spirit. You reminded me of loyalty, of humility, of dignity. These are the values upon which this home was built. That is why I leave it in your hands. I trust you to preserve what truly matters. Not the wealth, not the status, but the heart of it all. Richard Whitmore." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Judge Henderson's eyes softened. From the gallery, whispers stirred. She was loyal. He chose her. That sounds like love, not manipulation. Caroline's face flushed crimson. Edward clenched his jaw so hard it looked as if his teeth might crack. Andrew muttered angrily under his breath. But no amount of outrage could erase the power of the words echoing in the chamber. The public shifts. The press coverage that evening was electric. Clips of Clara reading the letter circulated on every network, accompanied by commentary. Her voice was trembling, but you could hear the truth in it, one reporter said. Those aren't the words of a manipulated old man, another countered. That letter was deliberate, heartfelt, undeniable. Talk shows debated the morality of inheritance. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Justice for Clara and Mon Whitmore legacy. For the first time, the tide of public opinion shifted. Clara was no longer a nameless maid. She was the woman who had earned a patriarch's trust when his own children had failed him. A heated confrontation, but the Whitmores were far from conceding. After court recessed for the day, Edward cornered Clara in the hallway, his face twisted with fury. "You think a letter makes you family?" he hissed. "You're nothing. We'll crush you in court. We'll drag your name through the mud until no one remembers you as anything but a thief." Clara lifted her chin. Her fear was still there, buried deep, but something stronger had begun to take its place. "Maybe I'll never be family to you," she said quietly, "but I was family to him, and that's why he trusted me, not you." Edward's nostrils flared, but before he could retort, a reporter appeared, scribbling notes. He stormed away, fuming. Clara's quiet strength. That night, Clara returned to her modest apartment, exhausted but strangely at peace. She sat by her small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She had not asked for this fight. She would never have chosen it. But for the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't powerless. She had her truth. She had Mr. Whitmore's trust. And now, she had the ear of the world. As she sipped a cup of tea, Clara whispered to herself, "I won't give up. Not now. Not ever." And in that moment, she understood. The court battle ahead would be brutal, but something had already changed. For the first time, Clara believed she could win. The second week of court loomed heavier than the first. Clara barely slept. Every night she replayed Edward's threats in her mind, his words dripping with venom. "We'll crush you." Yet one thing haunted her even more, the leather key she had discovered hidden inside Mr. Whitmore's letter envelope. For days she had kept it tucked away in her bag, too overwhelmed to act on its mystery. But now, with the Whitmores doubling down in court, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The safety deposit box. On a rainy Thursday morning, before the next hearing, Clara walked into the Whitmore family's bank. Her palms were clammy as she handed the key to the clerk. The woman behind the counter examined it. "This belongs to Mr. Richard Whitmore's safety deposit box. Are you listed on his authorization form?" Clara's heart pounded. She slid forward the legal papers Hale had prepared, proving her inheritance rights. The clerk nodded. "Very well. Right this way." In the quiet, dimly lit vault, the steel door creaked open. Inside the small box lay an envelope, a stack of legal documents, and, strangely, a small flash drive sealed in a plastic case. Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. More of Mr. Whitmore's handwriting sprawled across the paper. "Clara, if you are here, it means you've already faced the storm. But there is more you must know. Edward's debts run deep. He borrowed against the company, lied to the board, and nearly bankrupted us years ago. I covered it in silence, hoping he'd change, but he never did. The flash drive contains records, proof of his dealings. This family must know the truth. Use it if you must, but with wisdom." Clara pressed the letter to her chest. For years, she had carried the burden of being unseen. Now she carried something far heavier, the truth that could shatter the Whitmores' polished facade. The courtroom unveiled. The next day, the courtroom was even more crowded. Reporters lined the back rows, their notebooks ready. Edward's attorney launched into another fiery argument about manipulation, painting Clara as a scheming opportunist. "She took advantage of an old man's loneliness," he said. "She is not family. She deserves nothing." Judge Henderson turned to Mr. Hale. "Does the defense have anything further?" Hale glanced at Clara, who nodded firmly. He rose, his voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We have new evidence. Documents and digital records provided by Mr. Whitmore himself." The courtroom hushed. Edward's eyes darted nervously. The flash drive was inserted into a projector. Pages of financial records appeared on the screen: loans, transfers, gambling debts, and secret deals made in Edward's name. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. Andrew stared in disbelief. Clara rose, her voice soft but clear. Mr. Whitmore wasn't manipulated. He was protecting what he built, from his own son. He trusted me to carry that burden when he was gone, and now the truth speaks for itself. Edward leapt to his feet, face red. Lies, all of it, fabricated by her, but the judge silenced him with a sharp gavel strike. Order, Mr. Whitmore, sit down. The weight of evidence was undeniable. The family crack's Caroline turned on her brother in open court. Edward, is this true? Did you do this? Edward avoided her gaze, muttering excuses. It was temporary. I would have fixed it. She twisted this. But the shame in his eyes betrayed him. The gallery murmured. Some spectators shook their heads. Others whispered, he was the reckless one all along. Andrew slumped in his chair, realizing the empire they had tried to steal back was already crumbling in Edward S. hands long before Clara entered the picture. For the first time, the Whitmores' unity fractured before the world. Public reaction. That night, headlines blazed across every outlet. Shocking twist, Whitmore's son exposed in court scandal. Maid vindicated, Clara holds the key to the truth. Edward Whitmore's debt and betrayal revealed. On social media, the narrative shifted completely. Once painted as a manipulative maid, Clara became the quiet heroine who had carried a dying man's trust and honor. People posted messages like, Clara is the definition of loyalty. She deserves everything Mr. Whitmore left her. Turns out the real betrayal wasn't hers. It was Edward's all along. The hashtag, Truth Unveiled, trended overnight. Clara's resolve. Back in her apartment, Clara sat quietly by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. She held the second letter in her hands, reading Mr. Whitmore's words again. She thought about the years she had spent polishing the Whitmore family's silver, ironing their linens, overhearing arguments she was never part of. For so long, she had felt like a shadow in their house. But now, she wasn't invisible. She had stood in the center of a storm and revealed the truth, not for herself alone, but for the man who had trusted her when no one else did. Her fight wasn't over, but she knew now. She had the strength to see it through. As the hearing adjourned, Edward stormed out of the courtroom, his reputation unraveling in real time. "This isn't over," he shouted at reporters. "She'll pay for this. You'll see, she hasn't won yet." But his threats rang hollow. The world had seen the documents, heard the truth, and recognized the cracks in his story. For Clara, it was no longer about fear. It was about carrying forward the legacy entrusted to her. Not just wealth, but dignity, loyalty, and truth. And deep inside, she could almost hear Mr. Whitmore's voice. "Stand tall, Clara. You've already won in the ways that matter most." The final day of court dawned bright and cold, the kind of morning when the air feels sharp with anticipation. Clara stood outside the courthouse, her modest coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. She wasn't thinking about wealth or property anymore. She was thinking about truth, about the man who had trusted her, and about the life she had fought to protect from shadows. The verdict. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the gallery, cameras clicked, and pens scratched across notepads. The Whitmores were there, stiff and silent. Caroline and Andrew sat together, avoiding Clara's eyes. Edward, though visibly shaken from the revelations, still held himself with an arrogance that bordered on desperation. Judge Henderson entered, the room falling silent instantly. "This court has reviewed all evidence, including financial records, letters, and testimony. It is the judgment of this court that Richard Whitmore's will is valid. His estate, assets, and holdings are hereby awarded to Clara James as designated." The gavel struck. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Clara's heart pounded, her breath catching in her throat. She had won, not by cunning or manipulation, but by the truth, by the words and trust of the man she had served for 30 years. Edward erupted. This is theft. She tricked him. She's nothing but a maid. The judge fixed him with a stern glare. Enough, Mr. Whitmore. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Edward sat down, his face pale, his empire of lies finally dismantled. Aftermath in the media. That evening, the world knew Clara's name. Headlines praised her quiet resilience. From maid to mistress of the mansion, Clara James wins her case. Decades of loyalty rewarded, a billionaire's final gift. The woman who rose above betrayal. Talk shows debated the symbolism of the case. Some called Clara's story a modern-day fairy tale. Others called it a reckoning for families who mistake status for worth. On social media, ordinary people rallied around her. She worked her whole life serving that family, and they tried to erase her. She deserves this. This isn't about money, it's about dignity. Clara is living proof that loyalty matters. The hashtag Dr. Justice for Clara trended for days. The mansion. Reimagined weeks later, Clara stepped through the grand doors of the Whitmore mansion, not as the maid with keys dangling at her side, but as its rightful heir. She walked the halls, touching the mahogany railings she had polished 1,000 times. The chandeliers glittered above her, not as reminders of her servitude, but as symbols of the trust placed in her. But Clara did not see the mansion as a prize. She saw it as a chance. Instead of shutting herself away, she opened its doors. She created a foundation in Mr. Whitmore's name to help single mothers, underpaid workers, and domestic staff, those who lived in the shadows just as she once had. The mansion became not just a home, but a center for hope. A family confronted Caroline visited one afternoon, her face softer than Clara had ever seen. "I misjudged you," Caroline admitted quietly. "You were more family to father than we ever realized." "I'm sorry," Clara nodded. "I never wanted to replace you, but your father trusted me, and I'll honor that trust with my life." Andrew, too, offered words of uneasy respect. Only Edward remained silent, his pride shattered beyond repair. For Clara, forgiveness wasn't easy. But she carried herself with grace, showing the family that strength was not about control or entitlement, but about dignity and love. Clara's reflection. One evening, Clara sat alone in the study where Mr. Whitmore had spent countless hours. The leather chair was empty, but she could almost hear his voice echoing. "You've always been more than you think, Clara." Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She whispered softly, "Thank you for seeing me, for trusting me. I promise I won't let you down." She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a keeper of legacy, of truth, of a story that would inspire countless others who had been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. The legacy Clara's story became a symbol that loyalty matters, that unseen lives hold value, that dignity can't be erased by wealth or titles. She had been mocked as just the help, but in the end, she carried more honor than those who once held power over her. Her journey wasn't just about inheritance, it was about justice, about proving that who you are matters more than what others say you are. As Clara stood at the mansion gates one last time, she looked out at the world and thought, the overlooked often become the strongest. And just like that, her story closed, not with bitterness, but with triumph. If Clara's journey moved you, remember this. There are countless real stories like hers, tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice that the world needs to hear. Don't forget to subscribe to Truth Unraveled, hit the like button, and share this story so more people can see that even in the darkest betrayals, truth has a way of shining through. Join our community, because every story deserves to be told, and every voice deserves to be heard.